start welcoming you all. Good afternoon from an unusually freezing Brussels. It was snowing a few minutes ago, now it stopped. To our Europe-based speakers and participants, and good morning to our friends who are joining from the United States. My name is Hedwig Justo, and I'm Senior Policy Advisor at the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, as well as Editor-in-Chief of the Progressive Post, which is the magazine published by FEPS. Today, we are very proud to present a research and happy to discuss with our speakers and with the participants a research paper which has been recently published by FEPS together with the Center for American Progress, the Fondation Jean Jaurès, and the Foundation Max Hoffman, partners which I would like to warmly thank for their excellent cooperation. This paper, as you have seen from the program, is entitled Turkish Diaspora in Europe, Integration, Migration and Politics, and is based on a public opinion survey that was conducted in 4 European countries, Germany, France, Austria and the Netherlands, among respondents of Turkish origin. The paper that you can download from the website of FEPS, but also from the website of our partners, try to shed light on what Turkish people living in Europe think of their hosting countries, but also what is their feeling of identity towards their country of origins. It tries to better understand what is Turkish people living in Europe's attitude towards political parties, politicians, and politics in general in Europe, and what are their feelings towards the European Union and towards some crucial policies, including migration and integration. These are all very sensitive topics. After a few years of being continuously on the spotlight, migration and migration-related topics seems to have somehow disappeared from European public opinion's main concern, at least temporarily, and particularly after the end of the so-called refugee crisis, and even more in the last year with when people's attention is focused entirely on the COVID crisis. This does not mean, however, that these issues today has less relevance than it had before, nor that it has stopped being a sensitive issue. I think it's quite the opposite. Not only is migration a structural phenomenon with which we must live and which we must learn to govern in a humane way. And not only Europe is still badly needs a reform of its migration policies, but we also know to what extent the question of migration, of integration, of identity, of cultural diversity always feed into conservative and far-right rhetoric. This topic is also sensitive nowadays because of the increasingly difficult relations between the European Union and Turkey, while more than 5 million people nowadays of Turkish descent live today in the European Union. This is why I believe this paper is so relevant today. And it forces us to reflect on things that can be also uncomfortable for us, such as looking at our own attitude towards migrants, newcomers, at our shortcomings. And it urges us to look at them from a different perspective, through the eyes of the people who are asked to integrate and who wish to integrate into Europe. And it forces us to wonder whether the integration policies that we have put in place are actually effective. Last but not least, this paper can offer us important insights that could help improve EU and its member states' relations with both Turkey and the Turkish people who live, work, study in Europe and contribute to Europe's development, social economic development, as well as Europe communities' life. So this is just a brief introduction to this very interesting topic. I won't waste more of our speakers' time, and I will leave the floor to our first speakers. We have 4 outstanding speakers from very different backgrounds, and I think they will animate a very interesting and lively conversation. So the floor is to our first speaker, who is one of the 3 researchers that are written this research paper. His name is Max Hoffman, and he's Director of National Security and International Policy at the Center for American Progress in Washington, D.C. Max authored this paper together with Michael Werz and Alan Makovsky. Max, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Hedy, and thank you, FEPS and Fondation Jean Jaurès and Max van der Stoel for the great cooperation, as you mentioned. I'll attempt to share my screen here. Please chime in if I have a technical blunder of some kind. And I'll just try to walk you through some of the top line findings from the survey, which Hedy outlined quite well. Obviously, it's a huge survey, and I won't be able to cover it all today. But as Hedy said, it's a number of sensitive issues, particularly since 2014, with the fact that Turks abroad are able to vote in Turkish elections. It added a new level of sensitivity with active campaigning in some European countries. I should mention we also worked with the polling firm Data4You, who implemented the survey and did a wonderful job. On the screen before you, you'll see some of the sort of essential facts about the survey. We had a larger German sample intentionally, given the outsized share of German Turkish population in the overall European diaspora population, and the margin of error, et cetera, are in front of you. I should also just note that we talk about the Turkish diaspora. There were also Kurds from Turkey involved in the survey. They were about 6% of the overall survey, but slightly more in France, and we'll see a little bit of that reflected in the results. But it's balanced in terms of gender, age, et cetera, and representative of the overall diaspora population. Just as you see some broad demographic characteristics of the survey, we should note some variations. For example, the German respondents were more likely to have been born in Germany. 45% of the German respondents were German born. That was just 23% in Austria, and in the mid-30s in France and the Netherlands. As I mentioned, the French sample was also more Kurdish, also more educated than the samples from the other countries. Again, that's an accurate representation of the French diaspora population, but it does turn up in some of the results. The other important variation I should mention here is on citizenship composition, and you'll hear me come back to the citizenship question a number of times in this briefing. But there are big variations. Fewer than half of the German respondents hold German citizenship, for example, but in the Netherlands that goes up to 79%. And again, that will also be a through line that we'll see in a number of results. So before jumping into more slides, maybe I'll just hit some top line points. Overall, it's a mixed bag, the survey, for those who want to see the Turkish diaspora more fully or more effectively integrated with European society. Most in the diaspora feel at home in Europe. That's the good news. They're satisfied with living conditions, generally content with the host nation's integration policies. They also feel pretty widely accepted by their non-Turkish neighbors and colleagues, and pleased with the educational opportunities and economic opportunities that Europe brings. And those positives mostly outweigh the still significant discrimination that many report encountering in their daily lives. The diaspora is mostly uninterested in the politics of their current, their European home countries. That means, few strong grievances against the authorities, but also little involvement or sort of demonstrated interest in party politics. As I mentioned briefly, the communities in France and the Netherlands appear more fully integrated across a range of questions than the German or Austrian communities. But across the board in all 4 countries we surveyed, most in the diaspora continue to identify primarily as Turks rather than as Austrians, French, or Dutch. And they remain more interested in news and politics overall from Turkey than from the current countries of residence. And so it's sort of a mixed picture, and both explicitly and implicitly in the responses, the survey respondents really endorsed the idea that Erdogan has put forward, that Turks in Europe should, quote, integrate but not assimilate. Here you'll see some of the responses on the identity question I mentioned. Again, the survey on a number of issues showed the enduring power of Turkish identity and language. For many of the questions, we asked respondents to rate the importance of different things based on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the least important, 10 being the most important. And you see here averages, and you'll see averages throughout from the different countries. You can see that ethnic background, religion, cultural traditions are quite important, as you'd imagine, though relatively less so in France compared to the others. In general, across these questions, younger respondents placed less emphasis on Turkish identity and more on their host or current nation identity, which is perhaps intuitive, while less educated respondents, those with less knowledge of the local language, place more emphasis on their Turkish identity. Again, sort of making intuitive sense. That also lines up with the generational divides in the diaspora. But overall, very high weights across the board on these identity questions. Moving forward one, here you see a slide on the most used media sources, but these answers also reflect the wider answers we received on language and just use of language. As you probably guess, most respondents speak the local European language at work and in school, but prefer Turkish at home. The younger generation in particular is very comfortable in the local language, but they'll also return from work or school often to multi-generational households where the older generation may not be as comfortable and may prefer Turkish. And so, having come to the country often as adults in the earlier migratory waves. And so you'll see that there's a still heavy emphasis on Turkish, and that's reflected in the media sources that people go to. Turkish language television is the most influential source across the survey. And that language gap closes a bit with online sources, probably, again, because younger respondents use the online sources more frequently and are more likely to be fluent in the local language. We also asked, not shown here, but we asked about how closely people followed the news from different areas and found uniformly high interest in news about Turkey or from Turkey. Younger respondents were more focused on events in Europe, but they were still quite interested in Turkey. Moving forward here, just a few of the questions on community relations and discrimination are shown here. But that top line is maybe the best news in the survey. Respondents feel very accepted, very high levels of agreement across all 4 countries, across all demographic categories. This is the closest actually that there is to unanimity in the entire survey. Again, some evidence of more integrated communities in France and the Netherlands. So that positive note that people feel very accepted by their non-Turkish neighbors and colleagues is definitely complicated, though, by the responses on discrimination. Most agree that there's discrimination against Turks and Kurds in Europe, particularly in Germany and Austria, and many say that it affects their career. Interestingly, younger respondents are more likely to say that there's discrimination, which was somewhat counterintuitive, at least to me, despite being more integrated on most measures. And we think, we can't prove, but we think that might be precisely because younger people feel more at home in their country and have higher expectations of equal treatment. And also because of the better language and cultural understanding, are better able perhaps to pick up on subtle forms of discrimination. That last line, quite a few sort of worrying numbers say that they've been personally insulted or attacked. That's highest in Germany, lowest in France and the Netherlands. And men and younger respondents, again, are more likely to report such incidents and more likely to feel discrimination across the board. To try to get at these issues in another way, we asked how respondents felt they're perceived by non-Turkish people in their current country. The results here are pretty ambivalent. Significant majorities in France and the Netherlands, a plurality in Germany, and the majority in Austria feel that locals harbor racist feelings towards them. But equal proportions essentially feel that they're treated as equals, viewed as equals. So a real mixed bag there. Moving on, and I'm sorry to run through these quickly, but they're trying to sample some top lines. On integration, we asked many questions, of course, on integration, immigration, community relations. And again, this shows a nuanced picture. People feel at home in Europe, but despite the discrimination, but they also value their separate identity. Women tend to feel more at home than men, but interestingly, there aren't big differences by age on that question. And respondents are divided on whether they're country has done a good job integrating the Turkish community. So here, I think you see the two basic pillars of the integrate but don't assimilate attitude. And people in the Turkish community, they strongly feel that they should be more connected with the non-Turkish community, but also want to keep that separate identity and are sort of divided about further immigration. And I should note that across all of these questions on integration, the biggest gap is between those with citizenship in their current country and those without. So as you might expect, those with citizenship are happier with the process towards integration. Those without are unhappier, and with just life overall. On the educational and economic opportunities in Europe, people are quite happy with the sort of material side of life. Education is a big part of that, as you see here. And people feel that schools in Europe are better than they are in Turkey, and most don't want their children to be educated or to grow up in Turkey. There's not much interest in Islamic education. And, again, sort of general contentment here with the educational and economic opportunities. Just moving on to save some time, we tried to ask some fun questions like this one on sort of sports as a gauge of national affinity and emotional ties. This was actually, I should say, this is Data4U's excellent, the polling company's excellent idea. And Turkey definitely sort of pulls at the heartstrings, as you see. France is a bit of an outlier, but I personally think that might be down more to winning the 2018 World Cup than to anything else. I should note that I don't show it here, but we asked a follow-up question about who people would support if their current country plays a third country, not Turkey. So, if Germany played Spain, for example. And in that case, people really rallied around the home team, and it was overwhelming support for their host country team. So it's not anger towards the host, it's affinity for Turkey that you see here. In terms of basic happiness and ties with Turkey, again, most people are generally satisfied with life in Europe, and not too many think they'd be happier living in Turkey. Although older folks did tend to say that they thought they'd be happier living in Turkey. And that, to my mind, that could be sort of nostalgia. Again, for many of these people, it's been many, many years since they left Turkey. And these answers are polarized, I should say, with people either strongly agreeing or strongly disagreeing that they'd be happier in one place or the other. Most feel that their current countries are more democratic than Turkey. And they also feel that relations between Turkey and Europe affect the way they're treated there and would like warmer ties, but they reject the idea that the Turkish government puts pressure on Turks in Europe to support Turkish policies. We also had a range of questions on what they valued about life in Europe versus life in Turkey. I won't get into the details, but roughly what you'd expect, I think. Turks valued the prosperity, the freedom, the stability of Europe as compared to Turkey, and they sort of missed the cultural warmth, the closeness to family, and the absence of discrimination that they associated with Turkey. So, in conclusion, the survey presents a generally positive, though far from perfect, picture of cross-cultural accommodation. European Turks are deeply appreciative of their, quote, adopted countries, for many their home, of course, and not only for the material advantages, but also for less tangible things like freedom, organization, rule of law. Younger people who are educated in Europe understandably feel more at home, and the diaspora communities in France and the Netherlands seem more fully integrated than in Germany and Austria, perhaps probably reflecting the different migratory patterns that maybe we'll get into in the discussion. But the diaspora still places huge emphasis on Turkish identity, on religion, and most think of themselves first as Turkish or Muslim rather than, Austrian, Dutch, etc. And even the younger generation, fluent in the local language, shares a big focus on Turkish news, Turkish identity. And so I think, if European leaders, political leaders want to speak to these populations, they need to conduct sustained outreach in Turkish language across those outlets, particularly TV. And the diaspora is largely ambivalent about party politics in their European homes, but that's, good and bad, not strong grievances, but except for notable hostility towards anti-immigrant far-right parties. Those that do, when pressed, express preferences tend to favor the parties of the left and the Social Democrats, but most just don't feel politically represented in Europe. I'll just briefly on Erdogan. Erdogan himself is divisive as he is in Turkey. He's the most popular figure, but by plurality, not a majority. But still, most people endorse Erdogan's line that Turks should integrate but not assimilate in Europe. And that conviction is sort of in tension with the desire of some Europeans to more fully assimilate or integrate these minority groups. And the data also reinforce a paradox behind this debate that, across the survey, views diverge most starkly between those with citizenship in their current country and those without. And it reflects a simple fact that people feel more integrated and happier when they are citizens. And in the European political debate, often some hesitate to extend full citizenship to diaspora communities, saying that they're not fully integrated. But of course, the paradox is, as the survey shows, that citizenship itself is a primary tool of integration. So I'll leave it there. I look forward to everybody's reactions, and I'll try to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Max, for this very interesting presentation, which gives an idea of how rich the whole survey is and how many important inputs we can get from it. I would like now to give the floor to three respondents, three speakers. I'm going to introduce them first, and then I'm going to give them the floor. As I mentioned before, they are very diverse. They have very different backgrounds, and I think this is very important to have a very different perspectives on the topics that we are dealing with. So three speakers are Nacho Sanchez Amor, who is a Spanish member of the European Parliament and a member of the S&D Group, and he's also rapporteur for relations with Turkey. Then we have Asli Okyay, who is senior fellow for migration and border management in the Rome-based think tank Istituto Affari Internazionali, and Thomas Schmiedinger, who is a political scientist and social and cultural anthropologist at the University of Vienna. So my first question is for Nacho, if I may call you so. As I said, you are rapporteur for relations with Turkey, and this gives you definitely a privileged position, a privileged point of view to discuss this. We have seen that a unified thread across many of the publications' findings is that the member of the Turkish and Kurdish diaspora, and this, and I quote, strongly endorse implicitly and explicitly Turkish President Erdogan's maxim that Turks in Europe should integrate but not assimilate, even as their precise understanding of that phrase is open to interpretation. How do you react to these findings? We have seen how little interest, Turkish people living in Europe are in national and European politics. How do you think we can inspire members of the diaspora to become more interested, more involved in what is happening here in Europe? Also, this in light of the attempts of increasingly politicize their presence in the EU by the Turkish leadership. So, Nacho, the floor is yours.
Hi, Heidi. I could hardly understand your question. I missed part of the Max speech. I'm very sorry for that. I'm having problem. Apparently, it's my phone or my device fault. I'm very sorry. I hope you are hearing me now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do. We do.
Okay. I'm very sorry. I think I understood well your question. First, thank you for the invitation. Second, I'm here. I'm a newcomer. I'm an intruder because my folder is the things that happen there in Turkey. But for me, it's absolutely interesting the research that you did and what is the position concerning the immigration in Turkey. First, because the immigration of Turkish people or people from Turkish origin in Europe is conditioning the position of every government in his stance toward Turkey into the European Union. And it's clear that Germany could represent clearly this situation, because Germany has an enormous amount of people living in the country with Turkish origin. Germany has a different policy on the European Union, in the European Union, towards Turkey. And my question is, why exactly? I understand the rationale, but why the simple presence of this enormous amount of people is, let's say, interfering in the domestic policy of Turkey, of Germany, and in the relation with Turkey? What is the trigger of this situation? Is the domestic vote is only to try to, is related only to the migration, is related to the political stance or the level of integration of the population of Turkish origin? I'm asking questions because I'm really a newcomer here, and I do like to share with you my views concerning of the issue of the political position of the people of Turkish origin. First, in Turkey, always we have had a nationalist common, because what happened with the treaties in the 20th century. But now in the late years, the nationalism has been fueled for the official narrative, and this is the most pungent common ground in Turkish politics, and is, let's say, affecting, or it has been endorsed by the Social Democrats, the AKP, of course, the nationalists, and it is the playground of politics in Turkey. Is okay, you have to be nationalist, and then we could study about our differences, and that creates, to the Turkish living in Turkey and to the Turkish living in Europe, is the pride of your nation, the new Turkey stand by itself, the new anti-colonial narrative. We don't know exactly what that could mean from the European point of view, but is this affecting the Turkish in Europe? Is this narrative that is clear, present in a daily basis in the media in Turkey, is affecting the political stances of the Turkish in Europe? I think we have to examine that, and some of the results I have the occasion to watch, because I lost the part of the Max word, is supporting this view of the nationalist, is affecting the way the Turkish in Europe are addressing politics in general, or probably the domestic polity of every country in which they live. Second, the anti-European narrative that has been the official one in the last period in Turkey has affected the opinion of the Turkish in Europe about Europe. They perceive the European Union the same way that the pro-AKP media depict European Union there in Turkey, because as you notice, they follow very closely the media, or the Turkish media, or the media in Turkey. That could be slightly different, because there's a lot of media working in Europe with a completely different position that the media pro-AKP in Turkey. But how this anti-EU narrative has affected the political position of the Turkish in Europe, and the key question that I would like to raise to all of you, especially to Max and to Thomas. The Turkish in Europe are enjoying a completely free political environment. At the same time, they are supporting or endorsing AKP. And this is a question we have to examine, because it's strange. It's like, allow me to say in this a little bit brutal way, It's like a Turkish in Europe enjoying a complete free environment are condemning their compatriots in Turkey to maintain other completely political environment. I'm free. I could criticize, of course, Erdogan or Prime Minister Rutte or Mrs. Merkel or the religion or whatever I want to criticize publicly in my Twitter account, in my newspaper, in my private or public conversation, but I'm supporting the AKP that is impeding, interfering in the same level of personal freedoms in Turkey. And this is a question we have to examine, at least having the tool that your research offer to us. And I think we have to use all cards. The nationalists and the feeling of proud of the new Turkey. There are some people in Europe and in America talking about the neo-Ottoman. I don't buy this neo-Ottoman thing. This is about Muslim, and this is about to be a leader of the Muslim world, not a leader of an ancient Ottoman Empire. But anyway, this proud of the new Turkey in the narrative of the pro-Erdogan media in Turkey apparently affected the Turkish in Europe because they feel this proud in the research is clear, and for the same reason they support the way of ruling the country of Erdogan, but not apparently not endorsing that way of life in the place they live, because there are a lot of Turkish in Europe voting extreme right, isn't it? They are not buying, let's say, the anti-Erdogan narrative elsewhere in Europe, because this is one of the problems in Europe. In Europe, there is no Turkey. The most of the public opinion is just about Erdogan. And we have to unveil, that there is a country behind the shadow of the president. And not always is easy, because there is a kind of automatism. This is about Erdogan, and there is no other plural and diverse and vibrant civil society in Turkey. These are my doubts, more than my statements. But for me, it's absolutely interesting to know from all of you, how do you assess this situation, a little bit conflicted, in the way they see the Turkish Turkey, in the way they are integrated and enjoying the European way of life, and at the same time they are supporting the political forces that maintain their relatives, their cousins, their families in Turkey in a complete different, opposite way of life. Sorry for sharing only my doubts more than my statements. Concerning my position as a rapporteur, you are perfectly aware what are the situation is. I only received bad news from the very beginning of my position. I didn't receive any single good news. Real, sorry. Sorry. I didn't receive any single good news from the beginning of my story. I only heard about some new positive agenda. I just jumped from other German Marshall Fund reunion talking about this positive agenda and this positive new narrative. And the only thing I asked to my Turkish interlocutor, the last one has been Mr. Çavuşoğlu, Mevlut, don't send us more love letters. Don't send us more caresses. Send us facts. Release Kabbalah, release the Mirtas, don't mingle with the ATP position, and try to be sincere in your recent rediscovering of the European values. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nasha. Thank you for putting on the table so many doubts. I mean, Max described a quite a situation which is positive but has also a lot of shadows, and I think you put the finger on the shadows, on the many on the fact that even if, as Max said, Turkish people do not seem to be interested in European politics, nevertheless, the very real presence of so many Turkish people in the European Union affects the European Union and the national and the member states' politics. I'm pretty sure that Max will be happy to pick some of the inputs that you gave and reply later. Meanwhile, I see that there are lots of question and answer that start to pop up in the chat box of question and answer, and invite participants to write more. And I will try to give us as much time as possible to those questions. Now I would like to give the floor to our second speaker, Hazli, from the Istituto Affari Internazionali, who has an expertise in European migration policies. Hazli, based on your research work, how would you assess the performance of integration policy in the member states and at the EU level? And also, do you see the question, which has been already mentioned, of allegiance as one that will be increasingly problematic going forward in time? Hazli, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hedi. Thank you to Max and all the speakers, and for the question too. I mean, to be honest, we have many other questions being accumulating, so I will try to be short and touch upon 3 points if I can in 5 minutes. And I think answering the question of how the member states and EU integration policies performed in 5 minutes is a little bit difficult. But I think the survey gives us many ideas. It gave me many ideas. It made me really think about different things. And those are not specifically related to the question of the integration of people from Turkey, but general integration questions, citizenship, allegiance. And I think the survey gives a lot of food for thought for broader implications. The first one, and I will here touch upon 3 answers, maybe 3 questions and 3 answers, which made me think about that, is that should we maybe listen a little bit more to how people that we are trying to integrate define integration, and how they perceive what is integration, who should be the stakeholders in this process, what kind of process they are expecting or they are experiencing, actually, lived experience also. And those questions, I was thinking, one of them is the seemingly incompatible sort of answer of, I feel that my neighbors and colleagues accept me, but at the same time, I feel that there's discrimination against the community or Turks or me personally. And I was thinking, is this maybe a way of, can we think out of this seeming contradiction, that they feel acceptance or somehow like tolerance, maybe even towards them, but not really inclusion or accommodating cultural diversity. You know, it's like they tolerate, they accept, but at the same time. And here I want to touch upon the stakeholders in the process, because this refers a little bit to the broader society, the people around them, the non-Turkish, non-Kurdish people that they are interacting with, the colleagues, the neighbors. So there is, I think in this answer, there is a little bit of indication in terms of the other side should also do something. And then there is the second one that it made me thought, because they say, they ask, they say, quite a majority say that actually we feel that the Turkish community or the Kurdish community, they should be more connected to the non-Turkish community. So it's actually, this is the part that they see that they are involved, the part that they feel more responsible, that they should do more they should do more work, more effort, let's say. And then the third one is about the answer to the question, that actually what they say is that basically better relations between Turkey and our countries of residence, our countries here, is better for us, because tension and antagonism between the two countries is actually having negative effects on us, which brings, I think, the other major stakeholders is the host country, but also the home country. And so I think from there, I would like us to think a little bit about how an integration process should be. And it's because it's like, I think because how it started the debate also in academia and also in policies, EU also has sort of re-evaluated its definition. It started as one way, immigrants should be integrated and they are the ones responsible. Then we started to talk about a two-way process where there is also the host community involved and there's also a responsibility for them and they should be involved they are stakeholders in this. Then actually after 2011, also at the EU level, in the integration policy discourse and policy itself, the role of the host country has been included, thinking about a three-way integration. And I think those three answers made me think, and I think we should, instead of thinking or imposing definitions of integration, we should listen to people that are expected to integrate and how they experience this and live this and who do they think the stakeholders are. And I think there are multi-stakeholders, which we can talk about later on. The second point is, and already I am getting long, but about the allegiance, which then connects to the question of citizenship, but maybe that we can talk about it in a second round or later on in the question and answer, which is about this sort of like questioning about is insisting on a single allegiance, an either or option, or opting for one over the other option. Is this insistence really in touch with reality, in touch with transnational identities that obviously, I mean, the survey to me, it shows clearly that these people are happy with their lives. They have been there, the average years are 27.5, right? They are happy about the work. They are happy about the democratic values, the political environment in general. They're happy about education. They don't want to send their kids to schools in Turkey. They wouldn't prefer. Most of them don't consider to go back to Turkey. So they are happy about that life there. And they have planted roots in this country and they have stakes in this country. My professor from PhD, Rainer Bauberg, he had this article about stakeholder citizenship, and it was about who holds which kind of stakes in which society and in which country. But at the same time, it is obvious that they follow the news in Turkey. They want to go to vacation in Turkey. Maybe they want to retire in Turkey. So they have also stakes there. They follow politics. And so it's like just, and I leave it there. And I think this relates very much to the idea of citizenship and the integration as a process, citizenship as a tool to integrate, or citizenship as a reward for full integration. It links to that very much, that how much this insistence on single allegiance, one or the other, one over the other, is in line with this kind of transnational lived experience and perception of identity. And there I will just drop this question and leave it there. So I was wondering, in the question of, do you consider yourself mainly or primarily as a Turk or Kurd, or as Dutch, German, or French or Austrian? Two issues there. One is that actually the option of European is higher than the national options. And that made me think that because maybe the European identity is friendly, perceived as friendly with the idea of diversity, with the idea of being able to be European Turk, European Kurd. And it's not so rigid or perceived in this way as the national identities. And the second point there, and I will drop it there, if there was the option to this in this questionnaire of I define myself as Dutch Turk or European Turk, in addition to as Turk, as Dutch, which would have been the highest ranking answer? I have doubts that it could be the European Turk or the Dutch Turk, let's say. So I leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shazli. Our fourth speaker is Thomas. Thomas, you focus more on the case study of Austria, which is one of the 4 countries which have been analyzed by the survey and the research, and focusing more on the finding of the research. How do you read this, the fact that the Turkish community's primary sense of identity remains overwhelmingly Turkish? And given your experience in the particular context of Austria, where the country's current leadership follow a strong confrontational line vis-à-vis Ankara, what is your take on how these 2 dynamics can be reconciled? We go back always at this the fact of allegiance.
Thank you very much for the invitation and this question. Of course, for me as an Austrian political scientist, the findings concerning Austria are neither positive nor surprising. So I'm not surprised that people with a Turkish background or Kurdish background from Turkey in Austria generally feel that the Austrian society is more hostile than Turkish people in Germany or France, consider the French and German society. So definitely this reflects somehow the political discussion in Austria, the fact that we had a very strong extreme right-wing party in government until recently, and that the mainstream conservative party in Austria, the Austrian People's Party, took over actually much of the anti-Muslim and anti-Turkish propaganda of the extreme right wing. So you cannot, the Austrian Conservative Party is definitely today something different than the CDU in Germany, for example, or than it was 20 years ago. So this, I would say, is reflected in the data. However, I think there are also some other very interesting aspects in the data that can be read somehow between the line and that could be discussed as well. Because I see a kind of discrepancy between this data that shows a strong hostility of or a strong impression of the Turkish people in Austria, but also in other European countries to a lesser extent, that the majority population is hostile towards them. And the fact that most of the people on an individual level don't feel discriminated. So this is something contradictory and needs explanation, I think. And one explanation that was not yet discussed in the presentation made by Max is, and I would suggest this interpretation, that the notion that in general the European societies are hostile towards people with a Turkish and Kurdish background has to do with the European and national policies, but also with the propaganda of the Turkish government. And this propaganda of the Turkish government uses the existing racism in Europe as a tool for its own nationalist mobilization. The think tank SETA, that is very close to the ruling AKP party and to the Turkish Secret Service, supports this European Islamophobia reports every year, for example. And the notion of Islamophobia and anti-Turkish racism is part of the nationalist mobilization in Turkey. So this discrepancy between the fact that most of the people of Turkish and Kurdish origin do not feel themselves discriminated, but still consider the societies of the European states as hostile towards them might has to do also with this Turkish nationalist propaganda that reached them. But of course, the difference between the Austrian data and the French data and the German data definitely has to do something with the fact that this anti-Muslim and anti-Turkish propaganda by the Austrian ruling Conservative Party and the extreme right wing is definitely stronger than in France and in Germany. So I think we have to look at both sides of this whole game. And I wanted to add also something concerning the statement of Nacho at the beginning, because I think this is also very interesting, that this data does not suggest that the majority of the Turkish population and Kurdish population in Europe actually supports Erdogan. The society is as split as it is in Turkey, and that's something that would be very interesting if we would look again into the raw data of this study, because I really appreciate that you included the Kurds into the questions and that you asked about Turkish but also Kurdish identity. But actually in the survey, in the report, I do not see that the Kurdish data, I do not see if there are any differences between the Kurdish and the Turkish answers. And I think this would be very interesting to see if Kurds answer different to Turks, and also if, for example, Alevis answer different, or Yazidis. In Germany, we have a strong, huge Yazidi Turkish diaspora as well, of Yazidi Kurds, if they answer differently. Because I think one of the things that are really obvious in Turkish politics in the last years is that Erdogan tries to play with nationalism, but also, of course, with some kind of Islamic identity, not just for some post-Ottoman or imperialist goals, but also to hide his own economic and political failures. So one thing that still works in Turkey, if the government is in crisis, is attack your neighbors, attack Kurds in Syria, attack or help Azerbaijan to attack Nagorno-Karabakh, make some problems with Greece, and so on. And of course, this has this propaganda has some results in the diaspora here as well. And it would be very interesting to see how different segments of the population that has Turkish or has origins in Turkey react on that. And I'm still I don't want to talk too long because we are already over the time, but I still want to mention that I still think one of the big failures of the European Union was not to include the Turkish part of Northern Cyprus into the European Union, because we could have had a different Turkish project. We would have today Turkish as one of the European languages, the official languages of the European Union. And I still think that we could support somehow a secular and democratic conception of being Turkish to counter this nationalist, anti-Kurdish, anti-minority, and anti-diversity propaganda of the present Turkish government.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Max, I would give you the opportunity to reply. It's impossible to reply to everything, but maybe you would like to pick here and there and give your feedback on that.
Sure. Yeah. No. And I'm sorry I won't be able to answer everybody's questions, even the ones I know the answers to, which are, of course, as Nacho alluded to, there are a lot more questions and doubt than hard answers. You know, I think on some of the questions about the cognitive dissonance for people who support Turks in the diaspora who support Turkey, sometimes support Erdogan, but then will support, SPD or something in a domestic German context, for example. I don't know. I mean, I think it's more broadly that the diaspora is proud of Turkey and proud of their Turkish heritage, and they can get defensive about Turkey. So, they're nationalist in that way, in the way that many of us probably are, where, if you see your home country sort of beat up, you might come to its defense rhetorically. But, interestingly, as Thomas alluded to, there's not overwhelming support for Erdogan. Far from it. The diaspora basically reflects Turkish politics in Turkey, which was very, interesting. But the exception is actually the nationalists, right? The one party which sees its sort of share of support plummet in the diaspora is MHP. And so for all of the rhetoric, particularly in France, given events over the last year of the MHP, of the sort of far right nationalist Turkish groups, there wasn't sort of broad-based support that we found in the survey. On the EU questions, they also aren't too negative on the EU. I should compare the Turkish views to what the general population of Europe feels about the EU, but it's sort of ambivalent, like generally positive, but mostly ambivalent views on the European Union. People think that, yeah, it's probably pretty good for my personal economic circumstances. I don't feel strongly about it. And they're kind of divided on whether Turkey should become a member. And I think that kind of gets back to the broader the contradiction on political questions, that for most people in diaspora and not, I suspect, but certainly in the survey, it didn't seem to be about ideology, right? There's no sort of clear, or very few people have a clear ideological view where it's like, I'm SPD in Germany and I'm CHP in Turkey, and that's because I'm a social democrat and that's how I think of myself. It's much more sort of sociological and emotional for many people. And on the integrate but not assimilate question, I think this was Sinem's question. Undoubtedly Erdogan and the Turkish government drive that message, but it goes way beyond just them, I think, because the heavy support, really heavy support for that idea shows to me that the content of the idea resonates with the Turkish diaspora. And Aslı said, had a lot of, I thought, very valuable thoughts on that. On the question, on Aslı's other point about mixed identity, I just showed the slide with the question, with the responses on sort of how much weight they apply to different pieces of their identity. But we also asked in another question directly, sort of to basically choose a primary identity, as ridiculous as that might be. And we offered Turk, Kurd, French, Dutch, German, European, or mixed identity. So they had that option, and it was still overwhelmingly Turkish, which surprised me, actually. It was 74% said Turkish primarily. Just on Thomas, on your point about Kurdish figures being broken out, we have the data in the crosstabs, and I'm happy to share them with you. The problem was the sample sizes of the Kurdish responses were so small that we couldn't responsibly sort of take them out and present them as comparative, statistically significant. But we tried to note in the report, in the text, when there were clearly a big difference, when it's just overwhelmingly the Kurds feel one way and the Turks feel a different way. And then on Dr. Özke's question about comparing it to other migrant groups and minority groups in Europe, I don't know the answer. I'd love to hear, or read people's thoughts on that. I think it's a really interesting question because I suspect there are big similarities. So I'm sorry, I know I've skipped many, but I'll leave it there so others can comment.
Thank you very much, Max. We have had very active chats at the moment. I've seen that there are many questions, and you, Max, already picked some of the questions that were directed to you. But I would devote the last 15 minutes of this meeting to give the opportunity to the other speakers to answer some of the questions that have been raised to them. I picked from the chat, for example, there is one question for Aslı and Thomas that reads, what can local city governments and stakeholders do in order to accommodate Turkish people better, considering that their most important forms of organizations are dominated by conservative religious groups who are politically dependent on Ankara or other centers in Germany? How can they be won without opening ground for the spread of religious conservative agenda? Thomas, would you pick this question?
Yes, Well, in my opinion, especially local governments and city councils can do quite a lot concerning that, because a local identity and a city identity is actually not, is somehow also contradictory to a national identity. So you can be a citizen of Vienna or a citizen of Milano, and you can have a completely different ethnic background, linguistic background than some other citizens. So I think this approach towards the citizens of a city as citoyens of a city would be a very interesting approach. However, that would need also the ability and the willingness to approach these communities not only through religious and political community organizations, mainly supported by the Turkish government, but as citizens, as individuals with political and also economic rights. So actually in Austria, I see that some of the cities do a quite impressive work concerning integration of not only Turkish, but also other immigrants. And I would even say that that many of the cities, interestingly, not only left-wing ruled cities, even right-wing ruled cities, do a much better job than the federal government, because they don't have this approach, or they don't have the question who is part of our nation, because it's actually a fact that in a city everybody who is here lives in the city. And we have even cases where in my home region in the very west of Austria, where a mayor of the extreme right party, the extreme right-wing party, actually was very pragmatic when he had to deal with the local mosque community, because he knew the guys who go to the mosque. He knew that these people will be here if he likes it or not, and that he needs to find pragmatic solutions to live together with the small Muslim community in his small town in the west of Austria. So I think actually this local community level might be even the easier approach towards integration than the national level, where at the end of the day, we still have the problem that at least Austria still have the jus sanguinis. So we still consider even people who are born in Austria not as Austrian citizens. But and this needs to change, in my opinion. But until then, we need to do something at the local level. The city level is definitely one of the levels where I'm more optimistic than concerning the national level.
Hazli, would you like to add something? And also, if the question of citizenship is also emerging in some of the questions that appear on the chats, and you also mentioned before that it's something that you had something more to say, and my question is actually citizenship as a tool, or citizenship as a prize, as a final prize in a long process of integration. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, quickly on the local level and what Thomas has already said, I think I fully agree. And I also would like to add, just linking it a little bit to my first point about inclusiveness of how to define the process, how to go about the process, how to include people from different sides that they need to integrate to one another, let's say. In that sense, also the local level is probably pragmatically is much better idea. And I agree in terms of, I mean, not necessarily the citizens or Turkish, Kurdish origin people that live in a city has to be approached through their mosque organizations, etc. You need to involve these organizations, but also you need to consider that these people are individuals and residents of this local context, let's say. So I agree in that, and I think in terms of inclusiveness, and it's important. In terms of citizenship, I mean, this is a long debate, but it seems that actually we are also at the end of the report, where there is the brief histories about the citizenship policies and how they changed, etc. So I think, to me, it seems that in Europe, the process is going a little bit backwards, because it was much more in the 80s and earlier on, the concept was much more in line about citizenship as a tool, and actually citizenship, the host state playing its part actually to facilitate the process of integration. So I give you equal rights, I give you the tool to be politically engaged and to feel actually equal in many different dimensions of your life, and then it's also up to you. But then, since the end of the 90s, and I think it's very much related to the not polarization, sharpening of these cultural wars, identity, the definition of identity, very much more focused on culture, the differences, religion, etc. And it has started to become, and it has almost become a fashion. It was like popping up in the late 90s and early 2000s. It was really, with the exception of Germany, they did like a little bit of a different turn there. But I mean, for instance, the turn of the Netherlands between after 97, etc., is that, and the fashion of the assessment of integration through the civic course, through the language course. And I think, obviously, one should talk the language of the country and to be able to interact and be integrated, yes, but the approach or the conception of integration has become, and it's related to has become this, okay, the process the immigrant has to run, and most of the responsibility is on the immigrant in terms of fulfilling and doing this checklist of, okay, now I learned the language, I know the civic, and then we check it. So it's actually, again, coming back to my first point, is that a definition, a integration defined top down, and then you need to fulfill the checklist of that definition. And then at the end of it, we can give you citizenship as a reward because you deserve it, rather than we give you the citizenship and then. So it's like, I think, and the results of the survey show it quite clearly, that having citizenship, obviously there would be some conditions, residence, length of residence, this and that, yes, but citizenship as a tool rather than citizenship as a crown of successful integration is the way to go. Whether that will be the case in the coming years, on that I'm not that optimistic, but I think through these studies, this kind of studies that Max and his colleagues has done, we have strong proof and strong evidence of which way is more constructive.
Hedy, could I just really briefly on that point? I mean, I think actually I agree entirely. In some ways, the appendices at the end of the report are the most important part, right? Where they jump through the very briefly, and we had to simplify dramatically the trajectories of government, of state responses to immigration, because the legacies are very clearly visible. But they've also, what struck me, and then I'll let Nacho speak, sorry, is how much they've changed over time, and also how localized they could be. You know, you'd have a national immigration policy which changed 3 times in 10 years, for example, but then also Vienna would treat things different, would handle things differently. Baden-Württemberg would handle things differently. You know, so the actual lived experience of these migrants and these diaspora communities are all over the map, and that's why the aggregate survey data is valuable, but it's impossible to, you know, the conclusions won't make sense to different generations, to people in different states, etc. So sorry, I'll leave Nacho.
Thank you, Max, for intervening. I picked 2 more questions for Nacho. That sounds very provocative. Bahar Basser asked, do European member states perceive Turkey's active and sometimes aggressive diaspora engagement policies as a violation of the state sovereignty? And the other question, shall I repeat it? Basser asks whether European member states perceive Turkey's aggressive diaspora engagement policies as a violation of their state sovereignty. And the other question, do Europeans want really to integrate Turkish diaspora into their countries sincerely? So these are the questions for you to close this discussion. The volume, you're muted, we cannot hear you.
Now it's okay. No, the answer is clear. No, how can we perceive in any way the
Nacho, you are frozen. Nacho, your connection is not very good. Can you repeat what you just said?
Yeah. You can bet on that, because let me check. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Okay. Well, no. In any way, we can consider, we can see as a threat to our sovereignty any kind of public activity into the frame of the law of the country in you reside in any way, and Europe is a space, multicultural space, very respectful with the different identities and religions and backgrounds, and this is part of our richness. And I think in any way, I don't see, well, I can see the Islamophobic narrative of the extreme right, but this idea that the exercise of the citizenship as a whole of a person coming from everywhere in Europe is part of your the right that you are entitled to use freely. And if this use of your rights is into the frame of our wide legal framework, there is no threat in any way to our sovereignty. In any way, could you imagine in the Costa del Sol in Spain, there are little villages in which there are more people, immigrants coming from other places, British, for example, and they are entitled to vote in the local elections, and they can manage the local councils in any way that could be considered and is not considered a problem in any way. The other question, Heidi, please.
Was about, sorry, I lost my page. That the threat was, one was the threat of sovereignty, and one was the willingness to integrate.
Well, that depends the policies of every country. It depends on the policies of every government, regional and local government. And there are personalities like the extreme right mayor that Thomas evoked that are more open to do, and there are more for ideological reasons. There are political forces in Europe more keen to integrate or to accommodate the multiculturalism, and there are others that prefer a Christian white Europe. But this is part of the game, and
I'm afraid you froze again, Nacho.
But if they have the citizenship, is a citizen of the country, and this is no in any way it could be a problem. But we all know that when the policy of quotas to receive mainly Syrian immigrants in Europe was attacked by some member states, this was not about only the fact of the immigration. Any country, even the most radical opposing this integration, they have received gladly white Christian Syrian engineers, but not numerous, a big family of people
flying or running away the war without means, without education, without culture. This is about racism or Islamophobia, depends.
Thank you very much. We are perfectly on time for closing this meeting. It was very interesting, and I invite all participants to download the research and read more carefully at its content, because it's really rich in pieces of information as well as food for thought. And I would like to draw from what Azali said before, the idea that it's very common that integration is considered very often like as a checklist that has to be filled, and eventually there is a prize, there is the crown. While we should more and more, and I think this is also this report is a useful instrument to understand this better. Integration should be more understood as a two-way road in which we adjust to each other. Thank you so much to speakers for having spent this time with us and having shared their ideas. Thanks to the participants for attending, and also via Zoom and also via Facebook. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Ciao.
Thank you all. Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you.